from beautiful Kapolei, Hawaii. Uh, and I'm so happy to be able to see you again, to talk to you. Today is January 18th, 2023. Hard to imagine that it's gone so fast. But today's topic is going to be, I've actually saw that I did a video similar to this maybe a month or two ago. What's it like traveling to 30 nations? And I wanted to talk about that because I was thinking about it the other day. And, there are people who've traveled many more places than that. I'm not the one that's traveled to more than, like, say, 100 countries or 200. I'm not that, but I have been to 30 nations, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit. My first trip that I took overseas to another nation was when I was in the Army. I was sent, the year was 1976, and I was sent to Germany, then West Germany, because it was divided into East Germany was communist, West Germany was free and democratic. So I was sent to West Germany, and I was put on the plane. This was after Defense Language Institute and another training I had done in South Carolina, and then I was shipped to Germany. I flew out of New Jersey. I was excited, as I remember, but because I didn't had never traveled overseas before, I didn't really know what to expect, and all I knew was I was looking forward to it. And we landed in Frankfurt, Germany. I think we had to stop in Greenland first, because at that time planes could not fly long distances without stopping for refueling, and we had to stop in Greenland and pick up some more people and then also get fuel. And then we flew on to Frankfurt, Germany. And I don't remember how I got from Frankfurt down to southern Germany, which was Stuttgart, Germany. And I loved it there. I developed friends among the Germans people. I absolutely loved southern Germany. I love the food. Like lots of countries, there are different regions with different language, slightly different language. So it's not all like German. It has slightly different wording and accents. And then also the food was different. It's called Swabish food. And it was great. I loved it. And I loved my friends there. And I was there for a short period of time. I can't remember. And I was shipped back to the U.S. To go to some more schooling. And that was great, and I went back to New Jersey as we flew back the second trip from Germany. Now, in the 1976, it was not even easy to make phone calls back overseas. I remember if I had to make a phone call to, say, talk to my parents, I had to go to a phone booth and I had to have enough coins. They were called marks, German marks, and I had to put them in the phone one by one by one. And then the phone would be about, the phone call would be about ready to stop because there wasn't enough money in the phone, and you'd put more in. That's the way you had to do it. And then also there was another way where you could use a radio, like called a ham radio, and you could use a radio signal back to the U.S., and it was kind of hard to do. And there was a waiting line to do that kind of phone call, a waiting of a lot of people wanted to call back to U.S. So that's what it was like on my first trip. And then I came back the second time after my schooling. I came back, I flew out of New Jersey again, and we flew to, it seems like we went through Greenland again. I can't really remember. It might have been Scotland or Ireland. It was Shannon, Ireland. We flew through Shannon, Ireland, and then we put some fuel on the plane, and then we flew to Frankfurt, Germany. And this time I was sent to a place called Fulda, Germany, which was in the countryside. I didn't see too much there. I really didn't like that. It was in the middle of the winter time. I just basically stayed on the base most of the time. And I forgot to mention earlier, when I went to Stuttgart, they actually sent me to Berlin for a short period of time, and they sent me to Holland. So those are great trips. And during that period of time, I also took trips to Italy for my own personal enjoyment. I went to Austria. I went to France. Uh, it was great. And so I saw, I heard a lot of different languages. I saw a lot of different cultures. And, it kind of made me enjoy it. I wouldn't say that I wanted to do it with my life at that time, but I enjoyed it because it was totally different than what I expected. I did enjoy studying German language, and I could communicate pretty much conversationally in German, starting to be able to do that. And on that second trip back to Germany, I put more time in studying in the German language at the university. And so I was a little more, was able to get around a lot better. I lived in the German housing. I rented an apartment not too far from the base in Heidelberg. I was then sent to Heidelberg from Fulda. I was able to pull a few strings, and I was able to get sent to Heidelberg, which is like a dream assignment. It's a beautiful place. It's where the headquarters was for the entire army of Europe and Southern Europe. And I was stationed there, and I just loved it. I played tennis all the time. I had lots of friends. I went on dates, always with the local people. I don't know why, but for some reason that's who my friends were. And so that was my trip. And then I was able to finish my active duty, and I stayed behind in Germany. I just said I don't want to go back to the U.S., and I wanted to keep playing tennis. So I had arranged a trip up to Norway to play some pro tennis tournaments. That was kind of the best I was playing, was during that period of time. And I wasn't really, I canceled that at the last minute for lots of different reasons. I just stayed in Germany with my friends. And then I was there for a few months, and I flew back to U.S. to go to university. I remember we flew back through Ireland, from Frankfurt to Ireland, and then we flew back to New Jersey. Then I went to university for a few years, played tennis, enjoyed my life in the U.S. until 1980. The year would have been 1985. Christmas to New Year's. I ended up going down to Mexico to start doing Christian church work, Mexico City, Monterrey, Mexico, and I was going down to help the people. So my viewpoint had started to change a lot. I went from playing a lot of tennis, which I still loved, and I still love it, and I went to starting to try to help people with their life, not just hit a tennis ball over the net. I wanted to see people have a better life. So, feed them food. I didn't want to see people hungry or, suffering in any way with health reasons. And went down to Mexico on a bus. We took a church bus from Chicago down to Mexico City, and that is a long trip. But it was great. I was young. I was probably 27 or so. And I really enjoyed the trip to Mexico, I could say. I wasn't really called to go to Mexico, but I really enjoyed the people there. I enjoyed the food and the environment, appreciated it very much. And I decided at that point that if possible, if opportunities were available to me, I would travel more in the future. And I went back to the U.S., did more tennis, did some business, went to university, went to different universities. And then, I forgot, while I was in the university, we took a trip to Canada, to Montreal, Toronto, and we played the tennis teams in the universities, and also Quebec City. And that was really nice. That was over Christmas break, and it was a snowstorm. It was heavy snow. How we got there and didn't turn around and come back to New York City, which is where I was going to school, I don't know. But we ended up playing tennis up there, in indoor tennis, and we won. We had a very good team. And so that was also a great experience for me. So in 1983, 84, that was 83, 84, then, as I said, I started to go into church work to try to help people. I did training in Hawaii. And then I and this is also a different culture here in Hawaii. It's not like the mainland US. The people have their own way of, they have their own language, they have their own food, they have their own culture. And I really recognized that early on. And I was going to school here. So part of the schooling was when you finish the course and you finish the training, you got to go on a trip overseas. So we went to 7 countries. My small group went to 7 countries in Asia, and that really opened my eyes a lot. I went to Taiwan, Japan, Philippines, China, South Korea. Trying to remember if there were others. Yeah, and I considered, and we went to Hong Kong and Macau. I considered those countries actually, and I always have, because they have their own governance, currency, passports, things like that. So technically, you could say I've been to 27 recognized countries, but I had 3 other places that I consider countries. One is Taiwan. The second is Hong Kong and Macau, especially during those years when they were really on their own, or they were colonies of Britain and Portugal. Uh, and so, so that really opened my eyes a lot. Now, everywhere we would go, it was completely different language, and we always stayed with the local people, or the people. We didn't stay in like tourist hotels. So that was really that's what I enjoyed doing. I enjoyed trying new things, new food, seeing how people live. Like in South Korea, they didn't really have furniture. They just sit on the floor. It's like a wood floor, and they just sit on it. And that was really different, right? And so um, that was quite an experience to try to start to prepare me for getting used to having a different lifestyle than what I grew up with. Um, the weather is different. You had to be able to figure out how to get food on your limited English, using English language, and the people on the other side, because you couldn't possibly know all those languages. So when you went to Japan, you just had to communicate the best you could, point and try to get what you needed, and then hopefully you found someone who had a few words of English. But if not, you would just use your hands, point and give them money. And So that was really where I went back to the U.S. I spent some a few years there doing tennis, traveling, and continuing to educate myself about church work and missionary lifestyle. And so I was there in the U.S. for a period of time, and then I had an opportunity to come back to Asia. Now, at that point, I wanted to live overseas. I wanted to relocate myself overseas. So I had an opportunity to come to China and Hong Kong, and I did so. I took the first trip over to see if I liked it, what was being offered to me, and then I liked it, and I sold everything and went to Hong Kong, and then I ended up in Kunming and then in Guangzhou, China. The year was 1992. So that was a big change, because all of a sudden I was living, you could say, permanently somewhere. Now, one thing, as a U.S. citizen, you're still a U.S. citizen. You have a passport. You have probably property back in the U.S., personal property, car or whatever. And that was my situation. And you also vote, you pay taxes, things like that. So I chose Hawaii because that's where I had gone to school and I loved it. So from 1986 onwards, that was really my home base. And the now I'm living in Hawaii, all these years later, 2022. I kept coming back because I had to take care of personal things, personal matters. And this is where I would come to most of the time, unless I went back to see my family, which was in Illinois area, Missouri, in that area. So Asia was really a real training ground for me to get used to living in different environment. Like I say, it's one thing to just go there and know you're going to stay for a year or 6 months or 2 weeks, and then you're going to go back home. It's another to go there and say, no, this is where I'm going to be located. I actually stayed in Hong Kong and China, communist China and communist Hong Kong, now communist China, for 20, I think it was 27 years, 28 years, something like that. And that at that point in time, that was more than half my life. So I spent more time in Hong Kong and China than I had in the US, it turned out. So when you say that I feel really comfortable in the Chinese culture, that's true. Okay. So, and that's the reason why. So living overseas, and then I had opportunity to be the, you could say unofficial. Sometimes I was the official, sometimes I was the unofficial chaplain. It depends on the organization that I was involved with at that time. And with the tennis, to be the chaplain for the pro tennis players because of my background. And that allowed me to travel. And that really changed me a lot as far as in what's it like to travel to 30 nations. Because before, it was something you plan for. You say, I'm going to travel, I'm going to go, to Mexico, and what, months in advance, 2 or 3 months in advance, you start to prepare for it, you get excited, you pack your bags and everything, you're reading books about where to go, and that was that way. But when I was doing it on a regular basis and on a consistent basis, it was really different, because traveling then became like, it wasn't really a job. I never thought of it as a job. I enjoyed it very much, but it was like being an airline pilot and being told, okay, Monday we're flying to Amsterdam, and then we're flying back on Friday, and then Saturday we're flying to Canada, and then we're flying back. It was like that kind of lifestyle, and there was not months or even weeks of planning. So for me, it was really easy. I had my bag all packed. I learned how to get better at it. That meant that you didn't want to carry bags like this, especially 2 bags. You wanted to carry 1 bag, but you did it with a backpack. And so you put everything in a backpack, big backpack, and you had a briefcase maybe with your computer and stuff like that. And that was it. And everything was always, or actually a small carry-on too, I think, or maybe that's where I put my computer. But everything was easy to do. If I knew I had to go to Paris the next day, I could do it in less than an hour, pack my bag, because it was always the same thing that I put in there, and every trip was the same with what I carried. And then I just left. I went to the airport. It was like going to McDonald's to me. It was like, for most people, they say, oh, let's go tonight and have dinner at McDonald's. Let's pick up a fast food McDonald's. And then you drive over there, and then you come back, eat, you come back. For me, that was the same as going to London. Okay, I'm going to go to London today, and then I'm coming back. And I went pretty much consistently to the same places as the chaplain where the tennis players played. I had lots of opportunities to go to other places, but I had a family, and 70% of my time was spent at home. Total time, 30% was spent away from home. So when I was home, I was totally home in my house with my kids and my wife. So I looked at that and I talked to my family about it. My wife, my kids were too young at that time, but my wife, and she agreed. She said that was fine. And later on, it did create some problems, but I could say that I looked at it as I spent by far more time at home with my family than people who are working, because people who are working are going out, every day, 5 days a week or 6 days a week, and they're spending all their time at work, and then they come home at night and they eat their dinner and go to bed. Well, for me, when I was home, I was home. I had an office there in my house, and I did all my work from my house. So it was really, I thought it was a good trade-off, and it was good, and everybody agreed with it. So even my church agreed with it, but then it made difficulties later. But I would say my traveling was I always went to the same places, and then I had opportunities to go to some others, which I'll share with you. I went to Melbourne, Australia, Perth, Australia, and I would fly. That I would go through other countries. I'd go through Vietnam, spend a few days there, or Malaysia, or Indonesia, or Singapore, uh, and I would go to Sydney, Australia. Those were tennis places, and then I'd come back home, you know, and then I'd go to Tokyo, and then I'd come back home. Big tournament in Tokyo, and then I'd go to Shanghai and Beijing. Then I'd come back home. Then at different times, of course, this is spread out over the year. I'd go to London and Paris, usually same trip, and I'd go to southern France. I took my family with me to both Australia and France, and I'd go to New York City, um, St. Louis, Kansas City. Those are places that were tennis related. Trying to think if there were others. There probably were. I forgot them. There are too many places. But I kept it so that it was always the same place. So I'd go back the next year to the same people in the same place. And it was great. You know, they knew me. I knew them. I knew what to expect. And I knew where I was going to stay. The first year would always be tough because you didn't really quite know where to go. And Sri Lanka was another place I went to for tennis. So I would always know, and I did church work also in northern India, Calcutta, and northern India, called Assam, up near Nepal, and flew in there. That was really different place because I didn't really enjoy it that much because it was so different. You know, it's a lot like China. For an American, going to China is totally different. Going to India was totally different. You'd see people like whole families living on the street, bathing in the street, and because they didn't have any money, and uh, most people who go to India get sick from food poisoning, which I did too, because it's just the way the water is and the food. You're not used to it. But I had a beautiful time there. I stayed in a beautiful place up in northern India, and then also in Calcutta. I met some wonderful people there. And so I'm not in any way negative about it. It's just you really have to be called to certain kinds of places because they're so much different than what you're used to. India's like that for me. China's like that. Now, China, I was called to, so I could assimilate in very easily there. But so that was kind of the traveling aspect. You had to be careful because as you travel, I always mostly would stay with people who were local or who had lived there for a long time, and they knew what to tell me to do. You know, if you just show up on your own, you don't really know, and it can be dangerous. You know, there are dangerous elements as you travel. So it's always best. I always recommend people to go and pair up with someone before they leave who are living there, and they're actually going to stay there with the people and they're going to take care of them. So that would be some good advice, I would say. And uh, so eventually I just got to the point where I wanted to come back home, US. I live in Hawaii now, and this is where I want to live. So I'm living here. I love it. You know, this is my home, and this is where I feel comfortable, and I like it here. And I'm not, you know, I'll do other videos on Hawaii, but I did one yesterday called "What's It Like Living in Hawaii." So, but today's a different one. This is the international aspect, um, and I spent, I lived legally in Hong Kong, now communist Hong Kong. At that time, it was British Hong Kong. But that was, I know what it's like. I'm as comfortable in Hong Kong as I am in Hawaii in different ways. I know how to do everything there. Go and get food, go to the restaurants, do anything I have to do, I can do. And a lot of times on the internet, I'll see pictures of Hong Kong and like remote pictures of a street scene. I know exactly where that is, and so that's just from having lived there for say 27 years. And so traveling has been great. I kind of, as I was ending my traveling days, I I would always fly through South Korea. I love South Korea. I especially love the airport. I love the airline, the Korean Airlines. That was kind of my normal route. Or sometimes I'd fly through Tokyo, even though I didn't really enjoy it that much. Um, if I was transiting, because I love going to Japan. I've been there more times than I can count, probably 50 times, including flying through Japan. But just to go through the airport was not my favorite place. And then I did it through Taiwan a few times. So those were kind of the transit points. But I always try to arrange my schedule to fly through South Korea. And I would fly from Hong Kong to London or Paris. And that was really probably out of the two flights that I would take on a regular basis. Those were the most interesting. There were two of them. One was Hong Kong to Paris or London, because that one you flew along the Himalayan mountains over the Gobi Desert. You couldn't fly over the mountains because they're too tall. And you flew and you looked right at the mountains, snow-peaked mountains, and you saw below the Gobi Desert. And then you would go up over the Himalayan mountain alongside, and then you would take a left and you'd fly through like Kyrgyzstan and over Poland, those kind of countries. And you look down, you fly at night, you look down, and in those particular areas, they're kind of poor areas. Some of those satellite countries of Soviet Union, and there were no lights at all. It was like totally dark. You just look straight down. And that was an interesting flight. And then you'd land in Paris. That's usually the first place I went to, was Paris. So that was an interesting trip. I enjoyed it because of going along the Himalayan mountains. Very few people could say that. And then another trip that I took that I really enjoyed was New York to Hong Kong. And we flew up over the polar cap, the Arctic, and the pilot one time came on and said, "We're entering the Arctic Circle now." So you look straight down and you flew directly over another. I remember one time we flew several times directly over Alaska. You could see the Mount McKinley, the tallest peak in America. You could see. You flew over Anchorage, Alaska. You look straight down, and it was as clear as day. And you just look at the town. And then we flew over the Arctic Circle, and you could look down and see the ice, ice cap. And that was. And then you flew along Russia border, the western side of Russia, which is a famous peninsula there. I forgot the name of it now, but it's a very remote place. But they have a town there, and you'd fly along there, and then you'd land in South Korea. And that was one of my favorite trips too, and there was, I'm trying to think, there was one other I was going to tell you about that was special. Oh yeah, I was flying, this was just a few years ago, say 5 years ago. I was flying from Hong Kong to Los Angeles. So this might have been 2019, I'm thinking, or 2018. I think it was around that time. And because of the virus situation, the planes were switching. They were putting people on different planes and things. They were canceling flights. That's what I got caught up in. It was in the very early days of all that, as I remember. And they put me on a flight to Los Angeles. I got the flight ticket for like next to nothing, like 400 US round trip from Hong Kong to Los Angeles and back, which is wasn't abnormal to get very low prices from Hong Kong. But for some reason, they couldn't really book me. They switched me around to a couple of different airlines. Finally, they put me on Cathay Pacific to London. And they said, "We'll fly you to London, and then London to Los Angeles." And I thought, well, that's good. I like London. I like the flight, and I'm not going to get off, but I'm going to fly into London, and then I'm going to fly on to Los Angeles. A huge, long flight. But then they added the bonus. They said, and then when you return, we'll fly you Los Angeles to Hawaii to Hong Kong. So I got a round the world flight, which I've never done an around the world trip. Even though I've taken trips all over the place, this was one flight that went around the world, and it was for $400. So, or something like that. It was crazy. So that was a trip that was very memorable to me for sure. And I, you know, I can say I've gone around the world. So those are what it's like traveling to different countries, and my own experiences on it. I would recommend people to travel to different countries. Always love taking trains when I go to certain countries, especially Europe. I love the European trains. I love the U.S. trains. Trains are really great to see the countryside and to be comfortable. But it depends on where you're at. How the train system is set up, right? Um, and I've taken trains in Australia, which I also enjoyed, Melbourne to Sydney and then back. So I would recommend getting the most out of your travel by taking trains, locally, as long as you're in the countries that have good train systems and they're clean and they're safe. Uh, the other thing too is certain countries you can rent cars very cheaply, like in the U.S. If look around a little bit, so you can actually drive a lot around the U.S. You have to have planned it right to be able to do it. Flying from city to city is not quite the same because you don't really see the countryside, and you don't get to see the local people too much. So I would just say that's kind of my last choice, to do it flight by flight. Um, and you also look for airlines that, for example, if you fly from Hong Kong and you're going to New York, you can take Turkish Airlines or Finland. You can fly to Turkey. You can actually go to Saudi Arabia. You can go to Turkey on stopovers for free. I actually almost did that. And then you can go into, say, New York on Turkish Airlines. As long as it's a safe airlines, you feel comfortable with it. Uh, Finn Airlines is actually a very easy one to do because they offer great prices, and same way with Turkish Airlines. And they'll fly you to Finland, and then they'll fly you from Finland down to, say, London, and it's very inexpensive. So you get to add in Finland, and that's one that I was always tempted to do too. I never did it, but if you look around, you don't have to, as you're traveling, you can look at those options, and you have to do all this stuff online because travel agents, not unless you have a really good travel agent, you can tell them what you're interested in, and they may know how to do it, but they may not. They may just book you like American Airlines direct or with a stopover in, say, San Francisco. But if you really know what you're doing, you spend the time researching it. I use Expedia mostly, but they don't have all the airlines on Expedia. So, like, I'm not sure if Turkish Airlines is on that. Sometimes you have to go and directly to the airline itself, their website, and search. But Expedia covers most of the world's airlines. So that's a good tip for traveling. And also, don't take a backpack, maybe a hand carry on, like with a small bag that has rollers to it. Don't take more than that, because it really, when you're traveling, you want to keep it as simple as possible. And if you need things, like, for example, winter clothing, I almost went to Poland a few years ago, all throughout Europe, just 2 or 3 years ago, and then we ended up coming to Hawaii instead. But you just, when you get there, you buy what you need. Okay. If you need gloves, you don't want to carry them in your backpack. So heavy gloves for winter. If you're coming to Hawaii, you just bring a few shirts and shorts, and that's it. You don't carry a lot of stuff. So my suggestion is, when you travel, go light as possible. And when you get there, you buy what you need. Same way with shampoo and toothpaste, all that can be bought anywhere. But of course, you have to have enough to kind of get you over for the first week until you can go shopping. So that's it. And also, when you change money, if you know local people, you have them help you change money, because if you go to the bank, they don't give you the rate as the same as the local people know how to change money. So you'll get a better rate. You'll get more money. But of course, try to do things in a legal way. Don't do things where you feel uncomfortable. So maybe that means going to the bank. Uh, but those are just some tips that I would give you. Um, and in certain countries, you have to be prepared for food poisoning or food sickness. There's nothing you can do about it. The food is clean. The people who eat it all the time don't get sick, and that's all they eat. So, if you go to certain places, you may, like India, you may get, no matter what you do, you may get food poisoning, which can put you out for 5 or 6 or 7 days. So it's not a bad idea to find like a pill to address that. It has to be legal. I would do it when you get in the country where you're going. Don't carry drugs on any kind of drug at all. Don't carry on a plane, and because it's very dangerous, criminal liability. So just make sure when you get to where you're going, you tell the people, I need to go to the pharmacist. Every country has pharmacists. And then when you get there, you just and ask them, and then you just get whatever you need. So that would be, and carry it with you, and then leave it behind when you leave. Don't take it on a plane. So those would be some good advice, I would say. That's it. I hope you enjoyed it. That's called What's It Like Traveling to 30 Nations. That's the best I can tell you. I certainly enjoyed it, and I have great memories. I have good friendships with people all over the world, but I miss them very much, and I miss the places I went to. But there's a point in your life where you just need to keep those in your mind and in your heart, and you're not going to do them like you did before. So that's where I'm at. And I hope you've enjoyed it, this talk. Feel free to make any kind of comments you want. And, I'll do another video. These are easy for me to do. And I'll do some on a different topic. So take care. As you can see, this is how I live in Hawaii. It's very informal. I'm not going to be here in a suit and a tie. And I hope you enjoyed it.